All right, my friends, you got to see the first time we released a new bumper for Audioholics. It's still a work in progress. I'm still tweaking the logo a little bit, but I hope everybody likes it. It's a good change. It's all about what we are, about no snake oil here. We've got James Larson here. How's it going, James?
It's good, good.
Awesome. So I think you came up with a good video topic here about the case for subjectivity in audio. Because I know a lot of people like us because we do measurements and we debunk snake oil and we're very objective in how we approach reviews. But at the end of the day, we form our own opinions about a product, not just based on measurements, but based on our experience with them and how they sound and just how they look. I mean, looking at a product will affect your overall perception of the product, regardless of what you know about the product. Your eyes, you see with your eyes, you perceive things with your brain, and there's a validity to it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with liking one product over another one that may not measure as well and may not perform as well, but it fits better in your room or you just get a better vibe with it. So you came up with an interesting slide presentation here. I want you to kind of go over all this with our readers, and then if people have questions, they are welcome to put that in the chat. And first of all, I wanted to also thank you for all the amount of reviews you've done for us for 2021, James. You are a machine, my friend. Let me tell you.
Well, it's fun to do these reviews, so I'll just keep them coming.
I think I have a bunch I haven't even published for you. So after this live stream, we got to kind of prioritize on what I should publish in the next couple of weeks.
Sure.
Because we got a lot of good ones. And you're working on some new ones for 2022. You got the Paradigm Founder 100 series that you're
And
reviewing
the
right now.
and the Founders 70 LCRs too, so that'll be cool. It's
How many did
interesting.
they send of those?
Just one. This is serving as a center channel, but you can use the whole set as front LCR, so like the name implies. So yeah, it's
Awesome.
a cool speaker, but that's I don't want to no spoilers. So you guys will have to wait for the review for that one.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I'm going to share the screen here and we can go over all this stuff. This program's cool. It actually allows you to put the slide presentation right into it now. Testing this feature out for the first time. So if it glitches, don't blame me. But here we go. The case for subjectivism.
Sure. Okay. Well, like the title says, I'm going to make a case. So, we have always had these two camps, subjectivism and objectivism in audio, and there's kind of, there are extremes for both. And objectivists think they have like science on their side, that, well, we've been validated by science, for our approach to audio, and it's only for one small sliver of science, and overall, I would argue no. Science does not, you know, overall does not support objectivism, because objectivists seem to always just ignore psychology as a science. But
Right.
it's very it's a very it's overwhelming. It's like the psychology of like hearing and and listening is like it's most of what we experience, or what we're going for as like audio hobbyists or audio enthusiasts. So like we can go to the next slide, and
Oh, yeah.
we'll go into more depth with this. Yeah. Okay, sure. So there's no escape from expectation bias, and like expectation bias is just it's so powerful that no one gives it enough credit. To go through these points here, our expectations are inescapably shape and influence our experience. So like you can't get away from it. You can't get around it. Your expectations, they 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 shape everything that you perceive. Your experiences. You can't have experiences outside of your biases. But as our next point says, it's good. And so in our day-to-day life, um we need we need these biases just to get by, because they streamline all of our experience. So like what's the most succinct way to put it? you can't approach everything. You can't experience everything as if it were the first time you've ever experienced it, right? And that's what we'd have without expectation biases. You would just get overwhelmed. Like the first time you experience everything, you're intaking everything, about
Yep.
your experience, right? You would get overwhelmed if you had that approach. So like our expectation biases, it streamlines everything.
And I'll say this about that. I think one of the biggest tools that some of the manufacturers that give demos, especially for these expensive cables, for example, or even auto room correction systems, they precondition you before you actually hear anything. They tell you what you're going to hear. So in a way, that's a form of. Would you say that's a form of expectation bias when they do that to a listener that's never experienced the product that they're testing?
That's very much managing your expectations. It's controlling your expectations, and so, like I've been at those demos myself and at trade shows, and cable swaps. The cable swap demos where you have someone like check this cable out, and they'll like pause a song and input the new cable and then replay it, and they'll say, doesn't it sound so much better, right? But it's just managing expectations, and some of the demos I heard were for power cables. They weren't for
Yeah.
signal carriers, for power cables.
And then when people in the room start saying, "Yeah, I hear a difference," then you got confirmation bias because you don't want to be the one left out, so you're going to agree with the rest of the crowd.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's not quite what confirmation bias is, but yeah, I mean, it's similar. Your expectations are being managed, But for all these, it's so powerful because you have to have it. All right, your brain can't operate without these filters. It makes the world manageable, like this slide says. But the filters, they create blind spots, and you might call them distortions, and we all have them. And like in the research for this article, for the article I wrote that this slideshow is based off of, like even experts, even people who like well, people like you and me with more experience in audio, we were not immune to this by a long shot. In
Oh yeah.
fact, if anything, we were more vulnerable to it. And this is something that researchers showed. We know, even though we know of our biases, we can't overcome them, and that's that's the science, right? So anybody who thinks that they're on top of their own biases, they're probably more heavily influenced by their biases than anyone. So you
Yeah.
can go to the next slide.
So we have an article on this. I forgot that you wrote one.
Yeah, most of the stuff I'm using is based off of that article that was published a couple years ago, and
Okay. I'll link
I,
it up in the description
yeah,
after
but
this.
there's some other stuff in here too that's kind of like it takes that article in a different direction. So like, okay, all right, so here's where like objectivists kind of falter. Okay, we think that, okay, well, if our system measures well, right, then we're hearing what actually happens. We're somehow getting at the truth of our audio, right? No, at measurements, right? Okay, it's just a different. It just creates a different set of expectation biases, and it just shapes your experience in a different way. But it doesn't make you hear better, or it doesn't. It doesn't bring you closer to the truth. So to go through the slide's points, like, okay, the measurements only pick up what a microphone measurements only reflect what a microphone picks up, and microphones aren't like human ears at all. And like, so you can look at a measurement and you can kind of correlate that to your experience if you're lucky, maybe, but you still have these filters that you're running up against. And like measurements, they for objectivists, they just create a new set of biases that just shape your experience in a different way, but it's not more accurate, right? So like, let's say somebody who's like a sort of a subjectivist, and they see like a audio system made out of solid gold, right? And wow, that must sound good, right? But the same thing could go for if I showed an objectivist, as I think the next slide will show, like perfect measuring system, it just shapes your experience in a different way, right? Like here's this thought experiment that I kind of thought of to illustrate this point. What if I had a die-hard objectivist listen to the sound system, but first showed the measurements of that system's performance.
Oh
How
yeah.
would their perception of the system change if measurements showed abysmal performance or superlative performance? Okay, you know, I'm asking the viewers, what would you think? Like, Gene, what do you think? How much difference does the system's actual performance make if you're showing somebody the measurements of that system?
Oh, I absolutely think if you look at the measurements before you listen to the product, it's gonna bias what you think about that
it's
product.
it's gonna alter your it's gonna majorly alter your perception. But another question is your perception right or wrong, right? And
Right.
that's going into, like, I guess, a little bit more. It's getting a little bit deeper, right? Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't think it's either, right? It's not wrong to have your expectations shaped, right? You can't be in tune with the truth. You can't actually hear what your system is doing, right? You're just like you're listening to a perception, right? But you're not listening to the raw SPLs. You don't have access to that. So going on to the next slide.
Okay. It's hard to find the little arrow on this thing. Hold on. There we go.
Okay, so like here's something like a piece of research that's kind of famous that Sean Olive and Floyd Toole did. They had 40 people rate 4 loudspeakers in both sighted and blind tests. And of course, as you would expect, the results changed dramatically when listeners could actually see the speakers. The more neutral speakers scored lower than the nicer speakers in the sighted tests. And again, expectation biases.
Hmm.
But and it's the power of suggestion. If you think something sounds better, it's gonna sound better regardless of how it actually sounds, or how it actually performs, I should say. But and people, like objectivists, they use a study to like to show that to like, make a point about sound quality. Well, you can't always judge the sound quality of
By the
a
appearance.
system by the appearance, right?
Yeah.
I think that's reading that research. I think that's not the main the main point of that research. For me, it's that your expectations are the overwhelming determinant of what you actually you're hearing, right? It's not how it performs, it's how you think it performs. I think that's the real point of that research. That's for me is the takeaway. you
Well,
know
not only that, we don't, at the end of the day, we don't buy products based on necessarily how it does in a lab, right? We put
yeah
the product in the house, we live with that product. So let's say product A measures 80% as good as product B, but looks 10 times better. You stick that in a real room, you sit down and you listen to it, you might enjoy that product a lot more than the better measuring product. Just by looking at it, it gives you a bias, an expectation bias. You enjoy that product even more. Who's to say that that experience is wrong at the end of the day? It's like the people with the exotic cables. I always kind of make fun of the marketing claims of these cable vendors, and I show with measurements that it doesn't make a difference. But at the end of the day, if they want to dress up their systems with audio jewelry because it looks cool, they might perceive that they're getting a better experience with the system, even if they're not. Who's to say they're right or wrong?
yeah their perceptions, like,
Perception counts.
yeah, it's not you can't really say perceptions are wrong or right. It's like, eh, I mean, you could perceive something that's not there, like a hallucination, but it's not as if they're not experiencing that hallucination. The experience is as valid as anything, right? It's
Yeah.
just not a property of physical reality. But then again, you don't really have direct access to physical reality anyway, because all your senses are running through brain filters. So the
We're
next,
all living in the matrix.
yeah, well, yeah, kind of, yeah. Okay, the next slide kind of shows the results of this
Let
test.
me zoom on this. So the question is, why is the more neutral speaker ugly to begin with? Why didn't they just make that neutral speaker pretty, and then we wouldn't have to worry about any of this?
Well, like a smart loudspeaker company would do that. And some do. Like Revell, their speakers are really nice looking and they also sound nice. And like some others, like Paradigm, very nice sounding speakers, and they also look nice. And then
Yeah.
some manufacturers, they just go by the design, right? They're just chasing after performance targets, and they kind of disregard the looks, and that's a mistake. Unless of course the speakers are going behind like a false baffle or something like that. So So anyways, so here, this is the data in a graph of that Tool and Olive's study. And one interesting thing that about this study was like here the loudspeaker positions matter a lot more in the blind test than the sighted test. Obviously
Interesting.
the blind scores were very different from the sighted scores, but it wasn't just that. It's the positioning of the speaker. As you know, the positioning of the speakers, makes a big difference in the sound, right?
Yeah.
Not if you can see your speakers, right? If there's any kind of bias operating, it blows it away. And here's a quote from the study I have down below. The psychological biases in the cited tests were sufficiently strong that listeners were largely unresponsive to real changes in sound quality caused by the acoustical interaction between the loudspeaker, its position in the room, and the program material. So it's just the cited bias, the bias is created by just the looking at the speakers. It radically changed the experience of the listeners.
Hmm.
There's hardly any correlation. So it's like it just blows it away. That's the takeaway from the study, that your biases count way more than the audio performance of your system. So
Wow.
yeah, going on to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, a big part of what establishes your biases is your sense of vision, and the research that I kind of reviewed, your hearing is subordinate sense compared to vision. So like whenever there's like a conflict between hearing and seeing, vision will always win.
Oh
Always,
yeah.
right? It's like a quote from a paper here that I have. Vision has quote unparalleled asymmetric power over other senses. And research estimates that 80 to 85% of perception, learning, and cognition are mediated through vision. So vision is like, it's a dominant sense, way more dominant than hearing. And one experiment, I think this experiment should be really better known, especially among like audio crowd, right? About how much your expectation, your specifically the biases created by vision matters over the sound of your system. Is that okay? So the performance of top 3 finalists from 10 prestigious international classical music competitions was replayed to both expert musicians and novices, and these participants were asked to guess who the winner was based upon what was seen and heard. So if I remember correctly, there was some competitions, some music competitions, and they were videotaped, and the video recordings were shown to these people who could, the audio was shown to these subjects, the test subjects, and the video was shown, and then an audio and video was shown, and the results are that the results were like it varied wildly. I mean, it had a major difference on how the musical competitors scored when you could see them and see and hear them versus hearing them. So like the scores didn't change much when you could hear the participants. This people rated the performances very differently than when you can see them. But when you saw them and heard them, what what was being scored and what came out on top was the cited like competitions were a lot like the cited and like heard competitions rather than just the heard competitions. So the video performance of the competitors what mattered, how they looked like they were playing, right? These musicians, that's what mattered in this competition. It wasn't what sounds they were making, it's
Hmm.
how they looked when they were playing. And it's strange because you'd think that, well, for a musical performance, right, you think that's largely an audio event, right? No, it turns out not really, right? It's how people looked when they were playing, and these performances were supposed to be scored on just their like musicianship, on how well they could play an instrument.
Hmm.
So like, it's it's just it just goes to show how much like dominance that vision has over sight, and like And unlike objectivists, they kind of ignore it, right? They don't give it enough credit, but it's like it's a huge like uh you influence over our sense of hearing, you know. So like, and I list some other effects that you hear things that aren't there because of what you see. The McGurk effect. Do you know about that? That when you like when people are talking and they're saying things that you don't say, like sounds in their speech that you hear, but they aren't actually saying because you're just looking at how their mouths move, you know.
Right.
And the ventriloquist effect is it's how you hear things from seeing their position, even if the sound is coming from somewhere else. You know, I mean that's a really like uh, kind of a generalization of what that effect is, but that's kind of like the basic effect, you know. But there's a lot more to it than that, you know. But you know, it's too much to go into right here, you know. But yeah, basically hearing vision is totally dominant over hearing, and there's so much research. This is just
It's
touches.
interesting though, because when I really want to listen and focus in on music, I like to dim the lights out. I don't like to have a lot of visual stimulus. I
Sure.
maybe if anything, if I'm listening to Apple Music, I like to see the artwork on my screen.
Yeah.
But I feel like things sound way better when I turn the lights down, and I guess if I have a glass of scotch, that helps too. But
Yeah.
just
Sure.
lowering the oral senses or the visual senses, I guess. But yeah, I see what you're saying, because there's been times where I've had products in that just look beautiful, and I'm like, man, these have to be better.
They
I
have to
just
be better. Yeah.
they have to be better. And then they may not necessarily be better. I'm being biased. Hey, we got a super chat here. I want to show it from JT Larda. Appreciate that, JT. What is Audioholics made of? Honesty and chronic chocolate addicts. I like that. This is exactly why I only trust you guys. Always going the extra mile. Keep it up, guys. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yes, I am a chocoholic, and most of us are. I don't know if you are, James, but I know Anthony Gramani is, and
Oh yeah, I'm chocolate. I have to have a crown done on Thursday, and basically it's because of chocolate, because that's the only sweet that I eat, you know. So
yeah.
like, yeah, I'm a chocolate. I'm
Well,
crazy.
what sucks is I love dark chocolate and stuff, and I've been suffering a lot of migraines and chronic headaches, and I think there's a link between if I eat too much chocolate, I wake up with a headache the next day. So I've kind of been cutting that back a little bit, because nothing's worse than waking up with a headache.
Oh yeah, that sucks. Yeah, sorry to hear that. And I guess we can go on to the next slide.
Yeah, hold
Thanks
on.
for the super chat, by the way.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Okay, so like subjectivism, right? So I'm making a case for subjectivism, and it's not. It has a problem, right? Like, okay, audio subjectivists falter when they claim that the qualities of sound that they can hear have a basis in physical reality, which have been shown to be inaudible in blind testing. You know, so they make claims that aren't that don't really pan out when in like when those biases are taken away, right? The expectation biases or the power of suggestion is removed, right? And so, but then again, so that's not really subjectivist. So a real subjectivist, and going on to this next point, audio subjectivism is not the same as formal subjectivism, which is defined as the doctrine of knowledge, the doctrine that knowledge is merely subjective and that there is no external or objective truth. So like a real, or if you're like a really hardcore objectivist, you wouldn't say that measurements don't. You might say that measurements don't matter, but you would never claim that the things that you heard that might say may make one audio system better than another have any kind of basis in reality. You know, you would just say that's what I heard, right? That's how I experienced it. And but a lot of subjectivists in audio say, well, it might not be measured, but there's a property, there's a physical property of this speaker or this, you know, this turntable or whatever that makes it better than another one, but it might not be something that's measurable, you know. But that's, you know, that's not quite hardcore like philosophical subjectivism, which wouldn't have any, you know, doesn't even go to like any kind of physical basis at all, you know. And like I think that hard subjectivism, you know, that that says everything. There is no like objective reality doesn't matter, right? That's actually a more defensible position. It's not one I would take, but it's one that you can't make claims about like the physical reality of an event and then deny the evidence when it's shown right to you, like the scientific evidence that disproves your notions, and that's kind of what we're audio subjectivists like fall down, so like
Right.
if you just want to say, well, system A sounds better than system B, I don't know why, and I don't claim that there's any kind of real like reason and physics that has a physical basis for it. That's just what I experienced. That's perfectly, that's a fine position, and I can't you can't attack it, and but that's not what a lot of subjectivists take. That's not really the position. They always say, well, there's something real in the air about this system that makes it better, when there's not really, because those kind of differences don't pan out in blind testing, and that's where they kind of fall down. If they would just retreat to like more you might call a more extreme position, it's perfectly defensible, right? It's not one I would take, but it's one you could, So going on to the next slide, which we talk about the fallacy of objectivism. So this is almost kind of why I wanted to do this whole presentation. So objectivists, right? They think that they can hear because, well, they've measured their system, and their system has shown to be measure to be an accurate loud sound system, right? That
Yep.
they can hear that accuracy. Well, they don't have any more access to the actual physical processes taking place in that system than the most the most flighty subjectivist, right? You're still totally at the mercy of those biases and those filters that shape your perception, right? They don't have any. They're not hearing anything that anybody else that beyond or more accurately or more truthful than anyone else is hearing. It's just their biases, their expectation bias is just shaped by a different means, And so as the slide says, human beings do not have unfiltered access to the pressure waves that we perceive as sound. You're not hearing that, Your brain gets in the way, of what your ears are registering. And so, like the slide says, objectivists are just as susceptible to expectation bias as anyone. Their expectations merely get aligned by a different set of data. And going back to that thought experiment that I threw up, here's a pretty good measurement, that the image shows, but like, oh, is that what you're really hearing, right? You don't hear like a microphone, and even if you did,
Well, I mean, the whole point of that graph is it's based on the research that Harmon did, that if you have a family of curves and it behaves a certain way, then there's a high correlation that
yeah,
people will prefer that sound of
there's
that
a
speaker.
preference. But
Right.
like the research also showed, that's only when you couldn't see the speaker, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's only when you couldn't see the speaker.
That's a
And
good
like
point. Yeah.
and going on to the next slide,
And I argue too, if your only goal is to design a speaker that behaves like that, and you're sacrificing dynamic range to do it, where you could have another design that has way more output, less distortion, because this graph doesn't show distortion, but it may not have a family of curves as smooth as that, you might be compromising the overall sound and how it plays in a room.
yeah, I mean, I guess going kind of on a little bit of a tangent.
Oh, is that a that's not the Toyota, is it?
It sure is, buddy.
Oh, okay.
It's the same car in both pictures too. If
Is that the
you
new
look closely,
Supra?
yeah, it's a new Supra.
They stole our BMW engine for that.
I think that's. I don't want to go. I could go on about this. It's a cool car, and I'd love to talk about it, but it kind of takes us way off track.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's why I used it, because I really like the car. But like
Well, the one before it got smashed up, right?
yeah, that's the same car in both pictures. So the top one got it's just a smashed Supra, the same Supra, boom, got
Right.
wrecked. But anyways, I was thinking of an analogy that kind of like this kind of it goes off in a little bit of a tangent, but it's kind of a funny point I thought of when I was like thinking about this whole discussion, that like, hey, you could think of like audio reproduction in the way that kind of most objectivists do, as like a race, just a circuit, a racing circuit, right? Where the object of the race is to finish that race in the same condition that the vehicle started in, okay? And so like there are many pitfalls along the way of maintaining signal integrity. So the kind of analogy I want to draw here is that the race car is like the signal, and you want it to get across the finish line to you in the same way that it started, in like the studio, right? So you want to hear it like it was recorded in the studio. It was intended to be as a performance, okay? So everything has to be just right for this whole the chain, the signal chain to arrive to your ears, just like it was intended. So from the recording stage to mixing and the mastering stages, then they get encoded to media, and that media gets distributed. Then into the reproduction stage, where that media actually reaches you, it decodes the media, it processes it, it amplifies it, and that the amplified signal hits your speakers, turns that electrical signal into an acoustic signal, and then that travels through the air and hits your ears, and then your ears take that acoustic signal and turns it into an electrical signal again, so there's a lot of jumping around from electrical to acoustics, but and that you can manage all that, all right? You can get that down pretty well. The science of all that is pretty well, we can maintain the signal integrity all the way through the whole process, that whole huge chain, right, up until it hits your brain, right? It destroys everything, right?
Mhm.
Those biases that we're talking about, it just ruins everything, and that's kind of the point of this picture, and the racetrack that's in the next slide. Go to the next slide.
Okay.
So there's the start line up in the start finish line up in the upper left hand corner of this racing track that I kind of drew. I know it's not the greatest drawing, but whatever, right? It's just a analogy, right? So like you can start there, you go through all you drive through all these pitfalls that could compromise your signal integrity, right? From the electrical to the acoustics and back again, right? And you can be a superb driver, right? And navigate this track, beautifully. But then you get to the processing that takes place in your brain when that electrical signal from the auditory nerve arrives at your brain, and your brain starts to process it, right? That's where everything goes. You can't go past that barrier intact. So while the signal integrity might be perfect up to then, and it's such a huge effort to get it perfect up to that point, you can't go past that point intact, and it's a shame, but it ruins everything, right? All the effort almost for nothing, because your brain just ruins it all at the very end, But if you enjoy the experience, it doesn't really matter, And so I would say it kind of all makes it it's all for nothing, but not really, because even if you maintain all the efforts you take to maintain that signal integrity, right? That's still shaping your biases, and it could make the whole experience more enjoyable for you. So going on to the next slide. Yeah, so like I say, the audio hobby is not about chasing the most accurate sound reproduction, but rather about enjoying whatever sound reproduction you have, So like Olive and Toole's research showed that people generally prefer a neutral sound, but when that sound system was not visible, right?
See, and I never see that in the fine print when they show, or when I see their papers quoted, I never see them saying when not visible. But that is actually exactly what they're doing, because all their tests are usually done blind unless
Yeah,
they state otherwise.
the
Yeah.
results change dramatically when they're not blind. There's a huge change in people's perception of the sound when they can actually see what they're listening to. And it's just objectivists don't give it enough weight. They don't, give
Good
that
point
factor the
by
credit.
Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, accurate. I mean, accurate. It's fine. And people, when you can't, so you should, like, if you want accurate sound, we have resources that can point you in that direction, how to achieve that, right? And people, like we've said, like Olive and Toole's research has shown, people prefer it, you know? And I guess the most preferable system would be something that sounds accurate and also looks really nice, but it doesn't.
Here's a philosophical question someone's asking: how do you measure the musical experience? I don't think we really know how to be honest with you.
I don't know. With
That's and this is why I take a lot of heat, because I'm a big fan of vinyl, and I know people make fun of that, especially the guys that are all about measuring with their protractors and their HP calculators and stuff. But when I sit down and I spin a record, especially if it's like an older jazz record that just did not transfer well to digital, there's just a feeling you get, and you want to engage with that whole record. Yeah, it's not perfect. You hear some noise in the background when between quiet passages, the dynamic range isn't as good. I like the warm sound of the warm bass that you get with vinyl, because of all the equalization they have to do to compensate for the mechanics of it. I like it. I really enjoy it on certain music. I understand why people go nuts over vinyl, and you can't capture that with a dynamic range measurement or a wow and flutter measurement or a signal to noise ratio measurement. And that's why the format still exists. That's why it's still more relevant than oral 3D is for surround sound. I mean, when you think about it, people have been still spinning records. You go to a bookstore, you could still buy vinyl records. You could buy more vinyl records now than you could buy Blu-rays at some of these places. So
I think a part of that is um, the distortion of vinyl is actually, it sounds good, right?
does.
It just sounds good, right? I don't. Yeah, so it only has 12 bits of dynamic range, right? It sounds good, right? It just goes to show you don't need all the crazy, specs of, like, say, like a DSD, the high-end DSD, for something to sound good, right? So, like,
Yep.
that's vinyl, and there's more to the experience. There's more to, like, an audio experience than just listening, as this whole presentation kind of shows, right? There's for vinyl, it's not. It's you've got a nice album cover, right? That's beautiful, right? The artwork is beautiful. You can see that better on a than on a CD, or especially on a cassette, if you remember that when they're small.
So
So
here's a good question I just saw pop up. Should I still invest quality speakers even though my hearing is deteriorating? I could personally answer that my hearing is not as good as it was when I was in my 20s, and as a result, I get better and better equipment to compensate. So that's why I have some of the best loudspeakers in the industry in this room. The biggest thing if you have diminished hearing is to make sure you have good room acoustics. If you've got too much of a reverberant room, it could overload your senses and you can't focus on the quality of the sound. And I'm going to be doing a bunch of different videos on what I think a good room should sound like based on RT60 decay measurements that I've taken with myself and Matthew Pose and Anthony Gramani. But don't give up on good fidelity just because you have some diminished hearing. Even if you still only hear to 10 or 12 kilohertz, most of the musical content is below that. And the bottom line is to get the best equipment you can, reduce the distortions, get good room acoustics. And honestly, if you really want to get a good experience, and if you're medically approved, medical marijuana is the best way to increase the quality of what you hear. I can tell you, I could speak that, and I only say this if you're medically approved and if it's legal in your state, but you will hear things you never heard in recordings before. So that will help you compensate for the hearing loss that you may have.
I think that almost goes. Let's kind of goes in line with this presentation, like, well, with some medicine, with some treatments, you might say some uh, narcotics or whatever, right? You can hear stuff that's not actually there, right? But you might think is there. But if it improves the sound of whatever if it improves your experience, right? It's just
Mhm.
fine, right? And I would say, if should you invest in a better system if your hearing is deteriorating? If you think that it's going to make an improvement, then it probably will, right? But if you don't believe it's going to, probably won't. It's like a matter. It's still a matter. It's going to play into your expectations, I think. So, like, unless your system is really, really bad, or and just getting something that's decent is going to provide like undeniable. Like if you're going through from a single like a little goofy like Bluetooth speaker to say your RBH, those monstrous RBH speakers. Well, it's probably going to be heard, right? That's probably going to override any kind of perception bias that you might have, right? But like, I don't know.
The other thing too is what I've learned about hearing loss is if you go and get a hearing test and you're 20 or 30 dB down at, let's say, 8 kilohertz in one ear or 2 ears, that's at very low signals. So we don't hear linearly. A lot of people that have hearing loss, as you crank the volume up, their hearing becomes much more linear and they could hear the details that they can't hear at lower volume. So yeah, your hearing might be diminished at the very low level spectrum, but if you crank the volume up a little bit and you're sitting there and you're watching a concert or you're listening to a full presentation of an orchestra or whatever, you could still enjoy that even with diminished hearing if you have good equipment.
I think some people do what some people feel that if you have like say high frequency hearing loss, you should get a system with that compensates for that by having excess treble. I don't think that's quite right. I don't think that would pan out. I think we hear that as a natural, right? Because even if you have really degraded hearing, whatever you're hearing, it sounds natural, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound unnatural, but if you start twisting the response, it's gonna. I don't see how that would do anything aside from having things sound unnatural. It wouldn't
I mean,
sound
it
right.
might help. It might help. A little treble boost might help if the speaker's not distorting. That's the problem. If you start boosting treble and it starts adding distortion, your ears are still very sensitive to distortion. So if you have the dynamic range and you want to boost that a little bit, I don't see why that would hurt it. But it's funny because I still don't like super bright speakers, and I know that back in the day I couldn't even handle horn speakers, and I've kind of warmed up to some horns, like the JTRs, for example. Those are actually really good sounding horns, but there's been so many horn speakers I've heard at demos that I was like, ugh, I can't do that. I can only do horns in really large rooms. I can't do horns when it's almost 6 to 8 feet away and it's just blaring at you. I could hear the colorations in a horn. But I know a lot of older people, they go nuts for horns. They go nuts for those old Klipsch horns, and
Well, yeah.
those things don't measure. Most of those do not
Oh
measure well, but they have a
no,
huge following.
they have a huge following. I think they're just old school. They like a speaker that doesn't need a ton of amplification, to really belt it out. And like a lot of the problems with horns can happen in higher frequencies, all the horn diffraction, the throat diffraction. And like if you don't hear that stuff, if your hearing is degraded, you might not hear those issues at all. So like,
Mhm.
yeah, horns are just they can sound good. Like modern horn geometries can be really good and sound very good. So I don't think it necessarily being a horn-driven speaker is like any kind of liability anymore. It's just how you implement it.
Yeah, we didn't finish your slides. I'm sorry I cut you off.
Oh yeah, yeah, okay.
Are we done with this one?
Um, yeah, yeah. These are points I kind of made before. Well, but I guess one point that I would like to stress how often. So like Olive and Tool showed that people prefer a neutral sound. But when the system was not visible. But how
Mhm.
often do we not look at our systems, right?
Yep.
When are we listening to our systems that aren't visible? So like it's just it's the research is almost it's not that it might be giving too much weight, right? Because the research emphasized on invisible systems where there were no biases even in play because you didn't even know what the heck you were listening to, right? It's like the next slide, I think, makes kind of builds on that. So, like, if someone is dismissive of measurements, like Guide to Audio Nirvana, right? It's fine. It's fine. It's a completely valid approach to the audio hobby, so long as they don't make
Physical
claims.
reality.
Yeah, so long as they don't make claims pertaining to physical reality, right? And that sort of subjectivism is just fine. It's a defensible position, right? So so the vehicle by which we all enjoy our sound systems is heavily infused with biases that skew our perception. So you can't get away from that. Unfiltered reality is fundamentally inaccessible. Everything you perceive goes through all these filters that that hide so much of like the data that your senses are actually picking up. They hide it, they skew it, they distort it. You don't have access to like reality, basically, right? Like the Matrix might make that point, but the reality is like it's not quite like that. But I think that your senses have some correlation to physical reality, but I don't think I think most people give our senses, and especially anybody in the audio hobby, right, way too much weight to what way too much they attribute way too much weight to like the idea that they're hearing something that's actually there, right?
Yeah. So I'll give you a prime example of this. I've got those Bowers and Wilkins. I think they're the 704 S2, or what's the latest one? S2 or S3? I always get confused by that.
It's all number soup. It's like an alphanumeric soup.
Whatever the current 704 are, I have, and I have them in my guest room, and they've been sitting there since I moved into this place. Probably they've been sitting there about 6 or 7 months, and I finally hooked them up a couple of weeks ago and put them on the Denon A110 integrated amp, which is an awesome amp. And I wasn't expecting much because I've seen your measurements of Bowers and Wilkins speakers before. I know that most Bowers and Wilkins speakers have that 2 kilohertz notch, and I even asked them during our virtual press event, why do your speakers have that notch? And they didn't really deny it. And I think it's deliberate. I think they have a voicing of their speaker. I sat and I listened to it expecting it not to sound good, and I enjoyed the speaker thoroughly. I mean, it had a lot of bass for a small speaker. Granted, they were placed up against the wall, and my room has good boundary gain in it. It's a small room. It's like the room is like 12 by 15 or something like that. And I'm sitting there scratching my head that how this little speaker sounds disengaging. It's got so much detail to it. And I had a pair of $6,000 Dyne Audio Heritage bookshelves that are double the price. They look better, much better built, more robust drivers. And I did not find that speaker as engaging. Like, I kept going back to the Bowers and Wilkins speaker, and I was like, I really like listening to the speaker. Am I right or am I wrong? I don't know. But I wasn't the only one that felt that way. I had other people listen to them, and they're like, "Damn, that little speaker is freaking good." And it might not play super loud. It's in a small room. I didn't really test the dynamics of it because I know they use like shallow crossover slopes. But
Yeah,
that's an example of a speaker that doesn't really measure well on paper. But I
sounds good.
understand. I
Yeah.
understand why I understand why Bowers and Wilkins is one of the leading speaker companies in the world.
That's why I reviewed one of their tower speakers. You've seen the measurements. They weren't at all neutral, right? They had
Right.
a kind of a weird notch. Probably the treble was slightly elevated.
They are. They're definitely
But
the
you know what?
treble's
I
elevated.
like those speakers. I thought they sounded fine. I think though, if you had them aimed right straight at you as a listener, then they were a little hot. But if you had them aimed, if you were like didn't have them, if you were like say 25 or 30 degrees off axis, I thought they sounded pretty good, and the bass was actually pretty good. I I like them. But I guess
Yeah,
I have to.
and that's a good point because there's small speakers and I have like a daybed in that room. So when I'm sitting there up against the wall, I'm above the tweeter axis. So if I was sitting lower, I probably would say the speakers are too bright. But because those speakers are so small and I'm sitting above them, the elevated treble actually worked in that location. So really, it's obviously very positional dependent. But the bottom line is what I'm trying to say is, yeah, you don't have the great family of curve measurements that you see with all this Harman stuff. Yet you can still have a speaker that sounds pleasing to most people.
You know what? Something that's overlooked in those that family, the spinorama measurements,
Uh-huh.
is that like it doesn't show you where the best responses, the most best like direct responses on the axis of angles, right? And that's a big miss, right? So like those Bowers and Wilkins speakers that I had, right? Like the on-axis response had hot treble, but if you go move off to like say 25 degrees, it was actually pretty. It was I wouldn't say it was warm, but it wasn't like uh, hot. It wasn't very forward. It sounded fine, and like you wouldn't get that from a CTA 2034 set of measurements.
Right.
No, and you also don't get where the best vertical position is, and that's a big deal because most people like a lot of people don't listen to their speakers directly on like with the tweeter's level with the ears in a perfect listening room, right? I
Yeah.
mean, some of us do, but a lot of people don't. And the CTA 2030 doesn't tell you where your speakers sound best, right? And it's kind of like, I think people give it too much weight for that reason.
It's worthy of an editorial now that it's getting cold and you can't do all the reviews. I think you should visit this as an editorial and write something up on Audioholics, and maybe we'll do a separate live stream on that.
That would be
Get Matt involved.
that would be controversial. We would
All
have a
right,
lot
we
of,
like some controversy.
yeah. I
It's
think,
asking questions. It's like, if you don't question the science, then science can't evolve to be better.
yeah, there are some blind spots, and I think even the guys that who made formulated the charts would agree it doesn't cover every, it misses, it doesn't completely characterize a speaker. The 2034 set,
Yeah.
it's good, it's useful, but it misses some stuff that's important. And
And
so
I think there's a bias in the industry about not doing loudspeakers that have MTM, vertical MTMs. I think they get a bad rap because, it's all about having the best directivity matching. But to be honest with you, anytime I compare a speaker that has a mid-range and tweeter versus the same speaker in that family that's a mid-range tweeter mid-range, I almost always prefer the MTM over the single MT. There's more output capabilities, more sensitivity, and I think that controlling that vertical dispersion, even if it's not over the entire frequency range, I think it does help because I feel like it's projecting more of that direct energy at the listener. And I hear,
I know, I would argue that might be might be a matter of expectation bias. Not to be too kind
I
of,
guess it could be, but I'm telling you, the best speakers you've heard the best speakers in the industry, like the Paralistons, for example, those are MTM. I mean,
those are very unconventional. Those are
they
not
are
typical MTMs at all. They don't work. Okay, the kind of MTMs you're talking about are like what's called like Diapolito designs, right?
right,
That's
right.
not really what the Perlistons are. That's not
Yeah,
how they
yeah, I know.
they
But
behave.
so the Arundel sounds are more like an MTM too, and those were really kick-ass
Sure,
speakers.
sure, those are really
So,
good. MTMs are good, but they have, they have advantages and disadvantages. So
like
like,
any speaker design.
yeah, like any speaker design, I don't think that they can make it. You can make a good speaker out of an MTM, but I don't like it. It's not a design that I would just like say, oh, that must be better. I don't. I think it's all in the implementation, right? You can screw up an MTM for sure.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
And so like, yeah, I just have to see how actually, how the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Just don't put your tweeters on opposite ends of the cabinet in a horizontal center channel. I've seen that before, and I'm like, that's white van shit, man. I mean, there comes a point where yes, everything is subjective to a point, but there are objective facts that you don't want to have high frequency drivers separated by that many wavelengths in a horizontal plane. That's a
You know,
disaster.
I know that speaker you're talking about, and a lot of people like that speaker. I think it goes back to like your expectation bias. Yeah, and
I've heard that speaker in question, and if you sat on axis, it sounded great, but as soon as when you sat one or two seats over, you couldn't hear the dialogue.
I know, but like some people seem to enjoy that design, and I think that's why it had any kind of popularity. Not because it was actually a good speaker. Yeah, I know how flawed that design is, right? And I wouldn't
Yeah,
want that. But then again, I understand the problems that this sort of design would have, and so do you, right? And so like, if you didn't really understand it and you thought, oh, two tweeters, that must be awesome. Well, you might actually hear that because you would expect to, right?
right.
So like, there's that, right? I don't know. It's not. I wouldn't give. I would be very skeptical that that could sound good, and to me, it probably wouldn't, just because I wouldn't expect it to. To be honest, so like, I can't get over my own biases as like a reviewer. Some people ask me like, do you do your do you listen to the speakers first and then measure them, or do you measure them and then listen to them? Because they know how the measurements would affect my experience, right?
Yeah,
And I've had to ask before, and for me, it doesn't matter because I'm going to be biased either way, and I can't get out of it. So I look at a speaker, I look at design, I dig into it, and I would, well, this speaker must act like this, right? Based on my knowledge of prior designs and all of my knowledge of speaker design and so on, right? And so that's, if I don't see measurements, I'm going to be biased by that, by my expectation of how that design would probably perform. But then again, I can measure them and see how it performs, and that's going to change my experience too, just from expectation bias. And so like I can't get away from it. So I don't listen, or I don't make it a point to listen before or after measurements. It doesn't matter to me. I'm going to be a victim to my own biases. And so like for my impressions of how the speakers sound, and like, the subjective listening part of my review, you take it for what it's worth, because I don't have like, I'm just as much of a I'm just as subject to these biases as anyone. So like I consider that part of my review to be like the least important, right?
Yeah, I know that's the part you don't like writing.
I don't mind writing it, but I just don't think it's as valuable as the other stuff that I write, because it's all being filtered through my brain, and like I don't have some kind of like access to like, like some I don't have like a access to a higher plane of like perception where I can hear, my brain
James,
doesn't
I
work
got
that
to
way.
get you some edibles, man. I think that'll change for you.
Oh, really? Well, it would just change. I don't know if it would make things better or worse, but it would change for sure. It wouldn't be. I'm not hearing these speakers or these sound systems as they accurately are, and no other reviewer is either. So for any subjective part of any review, I say take it for what it's worth, but don't take it for as being too meaningful, right? In my review or anyone's review,
Mhm.
that's what I would say. In fact,
I don't know. I think people really do value. They want to hear what your experience is with something. They want to relate to you as a
sure,
reviewer. So I wouldn't discount that too much. I think people really appreciate your subjective side of the review. I get a lot of comments about that as well. So give yourself some credit. I think, and I think you've gotten way more descriptive in your subjective reviews over the years as well. You've gotten really into it, into experience, into writing the experiences you have with the product, and I think that is invaluable for people. Um, and of course, having the measurements. I mean, we just have more data points, and then we get on here on YouTube and we try to show the products to people and give them more of a tactile feel to it. I mean, all of these things are data points that they wouldn't ordinarily have.
sure. I think it's okay. So this for the subjective part of my review, that's all. I'm writing what I'm really hearing, right? That's those descriptions of my experiences. That's real. I'm watching those movies. I'm listening to those music, and I'm writing down those experiences that I had, right? Other people might not have the same experiences, but I think they do some good, in that a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people don't understand the measurements, right? And I don't blame them. They're kind of cryptic. It's just a bunch of lines for a lot of people on a graph, right? And
Yeah.
like so, like it gives some less technically oriented people
Well,
something to
and
hold
that's
on to.
speaking of graphs, that's one thing I wanted to bring up is some people spend too much time just looking at the graphs, and not to put anyone in particular on spot, but I'm going to. I noticed the typical audio science review reader will look at measurements and determine whether or not the product is garbage. And I don't like that. There's been so many instances in the past where I've measured something and it didn't measure that great, but I enjoyed the sound. I had a Past Labs amplifier that I had in years ago. It was $11,000 amplifier. I spent months listening to it on my Status AT speakers. I thought it sounded warm. I thought it sounded nice. I go and measure it, and at 1 watt, it's great. And then when I measured it at a high power, there was tons of distortion. And I'm like, this is garbage, right? I would never tell people to listen to this amp or buy this amp. But here I was enjoying that amp, and I liked the way it sounded. And there's been times where I've measured Yamaha stuff, like one of their preamps a couple of years ago, and I measured, the preamp, the XLR outputs had 20 dB higher distortion. The Synad on it was like 70 dB instead of 92 dB or something. That's still like 0.05% distortion, which is inaudible. So people look, oh my God, it doesn't have 96 dB Synad. It's garbage. No, it's not.
It's
It might
not.
not be, it might not be state of the art, but
It's not audible.
it's good enough for your hearing. And if this thing has good reliability and it's got all these other attributes, it has good DSP processing, it's got parametric EQ, it's got all these processes of channels of processing, you get phenomenal sound. I have the Yamaha, I think I gave it to Don now. He's got the 5100 and the MXA 5100 amp. That 11 channel amp measured okay. It wasn't great, but that thing sounds awesome. It's clean. It never gets hot, and it's not state of the art, But you know what? That shit never breaks. It works. The processing,
Reliability for me is far more important than performance.
yeah,
It's way more important. I mean, like, so like, yeah, you can measure a system that's like has incredible, right? The beyond state of the art measurements, in any audio component. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work that well. It doesn't matter if it's not reliable. So like, I would say I don't care. Like, as long as the audibility of the problems of that unit isn't really, intrusive, I don't
mhm,
care, right? I don't care. So like, I agree with you. I agree people put too much weight, are starting to put too much weight into measurements, and like especially like we were saying before, CTA 2034, the so-called spinorama measurements. Like, I was doing those before anyone, and we were doing those before anyone, right? As a
yep,
third party reviewer, and like, I get review, we always get comments, and whenever I post a review, like, well, this speaker measures, it must not be as good as this other speaker because there's like a slight dip at, say, 10 kilohertz. Like, people read so much into the little, like, flaws or whatever you want to
yeah.
call them, errors and the measurements, that, well, that stuff, there's so much there that's not audible. There's so much more. You would have to be, you wouldn't be here unless you're in like a laboratory type setting. I feel like eh, too much weight it's put into those measurements by people who don't know how to correlate those measurements into experience, right? You don't have all the experience, like somebody who listens to a lot of speaker would have, to know how those flaws manifest in actual listening experience.
So before I was doing Audioholics full time, I worked for telecom industry. I did a lot of T1E1.org standards, for DSL over POTS, and we built a sound room where we were testing filters, so you could filter out the DSL technology and not have too much side tone in the phone line and still hear well. And we had the only way we could really hear these low levels of distortion was when we were in a sound room. We were using headphones. Okay, if you weren't in a controlled environment and you weren't using headphones, your threshold for distortion was much higher. And I remember I was working on something for NAOC, which is like the battle plane that they order nuclear strikes on. And I was measuring clipping distortion coming out of the headpiece. And I could see the waveform clipping while I was talking on an oscilloscope, which means the distortion's at about 10%, like 20 dB or so. And because it was so quick and instantaneous, I never heard it. Like, it didn't manifest itself. And I see people fighting on these forums. It's got to be 96 dB SINAD or it's garbage. I'm like, really? So these are people that are they're keyboard commandos. They look at
Yeah.
numbers. They don't have any real experience in the lab, actually hearing and measuring this stuff and trying to turn it into what we could perceive.
Yeah, and on top of that, on top of those, the perceptibility of all these, like, these flaws, then there's like I've just been ranting about for the past, like, 50 minutes. Your biases overrule all of that. It's just,
Mhm.
you just can't get past it. So like, objectivists, I think there's two, they're overconfident, and they're like, uh they're the direction that they're like, the direction they take to audio, right? They're too, they give too much weight into like what they think they can actually hear, and like,
Yep.
it's all about just like having fun, really. It's like enjoying your audio. It's not about getting accurate audio. I mean, unless that's your thing. I just want accurate audio, and that's what I'll do. But you can't really knock a guy for having to say what you might consider be a lousy system, a lousy measuring system. If they're enjoying it, if they're enjoying it more than you with your perfect measuring system, I say they're more successful at this hobby than you are. This is all about how, like, having fun and enjoying the sound of your system. It's like, end of the day, measurements, eh. Like, I think a lot of manufacturers, like, a lot of manufacturers get criticized by those objectivists for not posting measurements, right? So manufacturers, you go to their site, there's nothing on, there's no curves that describe that speaker's performance, right? And then they take flack for it. Well, this manufacturer will post their CEA 2034 curve. Why don't you guys do it, right? Are you hiding something? At this point, from all the comments I get, from all like the misguided comments I get for the measurements that I post, or like how this speaker must sound because of these flaws, I don't blame those companies for not posting measurements.
Yeah.
And I think that if I were a loudspeaker company, I might decide to do the same thing, because any measurements are like, they're bound to get misconstrued. They're bound to get like misread by people who just don't know how to read them, who don't know how to correlate those to, experience, audible experience, So like, that's something that, I would just keep in mind, So the measurements are not, they've been given too much weight by certain groups, objectivists, right? Like hardcore objectivists.
But to defend the objectivist, we do have to have, some criteria to understand if something's is working correctly. And
yeah.
because they're on the flip side, there's people that just listen with their eyes 100%.
Yeah.
And you got to have a happy medium between. Truth is somewhere in the middle there, right?
Sure. You could, yeah. I would say, if you're happy listening with your eyes, there's nothing wrong with that. I would go so far to say that, because like, if you're enjoying it, personally, I would want, I guess it's my own biases, like, kind of like gear me towards, I want something that's vaguely accurate, right, to the signal, right? And like, but would I really need it to enjoy a good sound system if I didn't have all that stuff built into me? I don't know. I'm hoping that like, people stop attributing so much to having like the perfect performance set. You don't hear that. You don't hear that. That's not your experience. Whatever you think you're hearing, it's a product of your biases. So like,
Look,
that's my
there's
message.
been instances where I've gone and calibrated a room, and I had a very natural room bass response, elevated at lower frequencies but flat, and on measurements it looked great. It actually sounded good, but at the end of the day, they wanted to crank the bass up 10 dB. Or in Don Dunn's case, he'll crank the bass up 20 dB.
Yeah, like, you and Matt, I noticed, are kind of bass heads, right? I mean,
Matt's not as bass head as me. I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10, Matt's a 7, I'm an 8, Don's an 11.
yeah,
And you're probably a 4. You're probably a 4.
I'm probably a 4, maybe, as far
Now,
as what
Sean
kind of.
Olive said people that need more bass are either they have too much testosterone or they have borderline personality disorder. I know I don't have too much testosterone, so I guess maybe I'm a little bit borderline. Who knows? But
There's nothing. Hey, if you enjoy it, right? That's cool, right? Like, it's all about enjoying the sound. Like
yeah.
I said, you're not really after accuracy. You're after enjoyment. And so, like, people who think accuracy is enjoyment, that's a mistake.
And look, our measurements have a lot of use too, because if you want to know what size subwoofer you need in a room, then you need to know that these subwoofers can put out the output conductive of the room to hit reference levels. And there's no way of knowing that without what you do with the CEA 2010 stuff that we do outside. And that's why we have the Bassaholic room size rating, which, by the way, I wanted to talk to you about that. I never formally sent you an email, and I don't think I have the logo. Yeah, I do have the logo here. We have a new Bassaholic room size rating. You didn't even know about it. The Bassaholic Maximus.
Okay. Yeah, I think I read something about it, but I don't know the details on that. I know
The
you had to
reason why
vote.
we have this is there's too many subwoofers in our spreadsheet that meet the extreme. And now there's subwoofers like the Monolith THX 16-inch. There's a good bit of margin there. And RBH is working on a quad isobaric subwoofer for the back of my room over here. It's going to have 412s per box. And I think it's time to move that Bassaholic room size rating up a notch. And we're going to be talking about this in the coming weeks, and we'll see if we could come up with a happy medium. But I'm thinking maybe a good 4 or 5 dB more output below 30 hertz from our extreme would be, because at those frequencies, 4 dB is about twice as loud.
Yeah.
Pretty close to it. So, anyways, I just to let people know that we're not saying measurements don't matter. Of course, they matter, because we're able to calculate how a product will perform in a room to get you enough clean output.
Yeah, and Oh, by the way, about that Maximus thing, uh, the problem with that is a lot of I mean, if you look at the subs that could, I don't, if you're just say like 4 dB above our maximum like large room size.
Extreme.
Oh yeah, extreme. That's a big sub, man. I don't know if I could handle any subs that could actually. I mean, I can if like in certain circumstances, right? But man, a sub that's 4 dB or 5 dB above extreme. Oh, that's not something I could review very often without a
Well,
lot of help.
we gotta get you working out, man. That's the thing. Or we gotta work now that Matt's here. I'll have to have him come over here and we just have to find a test site. That's the problem. We can't really test subs in Florida. It's too freaking hot here. Like 10 out of the 12 months, it's unbearably hot to do outdoor measurements.
You know, you could always do them at night. In fact, no, night is better because of the lower noise floor, generally
And you
speaking.
got tons of mosquitoes.
There's that, yeah. It's just not a great place to do
No,
subwoofer
I mean,
testing.
we'll worry about that later. I do think we have I do think it'd be cool to have this really reserved spec that maybe 6 subwoofers get, something just balls to the wall, volume 11, someone that just wants to have, like a JTR dual 18 kind of sub. And
The Maximus, or what was it called again? The Maximus?
Maximus, yeah.
That's yeah, okay. Well, that's I think maybe if one sub in our in recent testing could get that, it would be that monolith 16-inch
Yep.
monstrosity. That's yeah. I mean, if there's anything that yeah, that would be one certain candidate for or those dual 18s from JTR for sure. Yeah. So that's well, you'll have to send me the details and we can see where that might land. There's definitely a case for that because we do have a lot of subs that exceed that extreme room rating by like a large margin. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. I came up with that standard like almost 10 years ago, and the subwoofer landscape has changed a lot. I mean, everybody's making high output subs now. Go back to the early 2000s or the late 90s, we
There's
didn't have
nothing like
subwoofers.
this. Yeah.
Nothing would have even met our large room size rating.
Oh, I
Barely.
think we had subs meet that, but extreme would be. I don't know if any. I don't know what. I don't know anything that could meet the extreme from that era, the early 2000s.
Nope.
I don't. I can't see it. Yeah, that's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Well, not look forward to like actually hauling around. Yeah.
We got to get it on wheels. I told Shane from RBH when he sends that sub, it better be on wheels because I am not lifting that thing.
Yeah, yeah, you got like Matt. Matt will tell you it can be a pain in the butt. Right? Sub testing is it has its challenges. There's physical challenges, especially if you have a large sub. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and again, let's all thank James for being a trooper and going out there in all sorts of weather conditions. And I don't think people realize the amount of effort it is to go outside and measure subs. That's why we're pretty much the only game in town doing it. It's an
yeah,
effort. It's an effort, but and I think Josh Rickey used to do it, but I haven't seen him do it in years.
he hasn't done it in years. Yeah, I mean he did it with the best. He was the best in the business, but he hasn't done
So
it in years. So
so he and I were the ones that wrote that baseaholic room size rating. So that goes way back. It makes me feel old. I can't believe we've been doing it that long, but yeah.
well, I guess you know what might I don't know if this THX Dominus thing is kind of a corollary to this Maximus. I mean, Dominus and Maximus both sound like kind of like Latin words,
I wanted to call it the Donimus for Don, but
Dominus.
I figured we get sued by THX.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, but it still makes sense. He seems like I mean,
And
if
you know what? Here's another thought of how someone can get a Maximus rating or an extreme rating in a room. If you get 4 subwoofers that are baseaholic large room size rated and you corner load one in each corner, the coupling effect will still act like a co-located sub below about 30 hertz. So that might get someone to the next level certification. So if they have 4 large and they have a good output from the coupling effect of those 4 subs, they could have an extreme baseaholic room size rating in their room with the 4 large baseaholic rated subs. So that's something that, maybe we should talk a little bit about in the future as well.
honestly,
Well,
that's like the logical approach. Like a lot of
yeah.
people want these massive subs. Not me. Not me. Like I've dealt with them, right? Yeah, they're really cool, but you can get the same kind of output by just having a bunch of small subs. And
Absolutely.
with the small subs, you get a natural smoothing, a natural in-room response smoothing. So the not as much EQ is needed, which is exactly what you want. The less EQ you have to do, the better it is for everything. So like my ideal system wouldn't be some massive sub. Sometimes people ask me, what would you want? What's the sub that, what kind of subs do you have? My ideal system would be just a bunch of small subs that have like reasonably good performance, and then just spread them all over the place and have just the perfect response that needs hardly any equalization. You know, and they don't break your back. They can fit anywhere. They don't take a lot of power, so you don't have to worry about the load on your circuits as much. There's just so many advantages over a bunch of like modestly sized subs over one gigantic thing.
So I'm happy that Class D amplifiers are at the same level or above the performance of ABs now, because I don't have to haul 100-pound amplifiers anymore. You could get state-of-the-art amplifiers now, 40 to 60 pounds, multi-channel amplifiers. That's a weight off of my back. So I can understand you not wanting to lift heavy subs for sure.
Sure, the amplifiers they never constitute a lot of weight for the subs, whether
No, I'm not talking about sub amps. I'm talking about full range amps.
Oh yeah, I mean I've had some amps that Jesus, yeah, AB, yeah. The D is nice just for the load it takes off your back, when you actually have to lift it.
So there's a question here from Joe and Tell about, do you use the multi-sub optimizer software? I know Matthew Pose is very familiar with that. And
I've not used it. I know of it. It seems if you're like really into tweaking the response, like fine tuning stuff, it seems like it'd be useful for that. But personally, I'm like Eugene. I just like put the subs in the best place and then just globally EQ the whole response. I think that gives you the best results.
yeah,
Like,
it's. I mean, we got good at it because we've been doing it for so long. But at the end of the day, I get the digital alignments going. I use a spectrogram sometimes. I'm sorry, a wavelet to figure out the time alignment of the subs. I generally do global EQ. Sometimes I'll do individual EQ. If I measure a bunch of different seats at once and I see that there's one sub causing a problem, I'll do manual EQ to that sub. But I mean, it would be nice if we had an automated process. I've had mixed results with everything. I've had mixed results with room correction systems, and I'm always wound up manually doing it myself.
the only system I really liked that was kind of automated was direct bass control. That was really good.
And I have to test that because I have the full direct live. Everything's built into the Storm. I just have not had time to do
Do you
it.
have the bass control module? Because that's something you have to like put in, like install and activate separately from the whole live suite, right? That's like
Yep.
a component, and that was really good. That was good. I mean, I could just like, I was never really happy. I mean, I've used MCACC, I've used Odyssey, right?
The only limitation with that is it won't do stereo bass optimization. So my main speakers up front are in stereo and they have LFE going to them. So I'm not sure if I can really do that with this system. I've been working with Storm to see if there's like an upgrade path to that. That's why I've been kind of holding off. But
Well, stereo bass is like,
well, my front subs are crossed over at 125 hertz because they're
yeah, they're basically right on top of your mains. So,
exactly,
but
yeah.
I mean, I remember Matt, he gave a presentation, a live stream presentation on the merits of like stereo bass.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, what the research he drew upon for that suggests that it might have some merits for certain types of music, mainly classical music or music that's performed in like a symphonic hall, right?
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, he didn't seem to think there was any real. Basically, I'm saying it doesn't seem like it's worth worrying about. It's like.
Well, it isn't when you're crossing over at 80 hertz, but when you're up to 125 hertz.
Sure, yeah, it would make more of a difference. Yeah,
Yeah.
I could see that for sure. Well, yeah, that's something. It would be nice to have the option for sure. Yeah, at that high of a crossover. Yeah. Or you could just cross. Those speakers can handle a lower crossover than 125
They
dB.
can, but I'm actually playing a trick because the ground bounce issue that I have with the mids
Oh,
kind of is mitigated with the subs on the floor and ceiling. So that's why I crossed over the subs higher and I got rid of that problem at the seats.
okay, sure, all right. That's you get one. I guess there's always a trade-off. I suppose you can't have everything. I think
Yeah.
you probably could if you have some really good headphones with a binaural recording with head tracking and like HTRF like measurement system specific to your ears. You could have everything with a really good set of headphones. But like,
And tactile transducer because you won't feel the bass with a
yeah,
headphone.
I guess you really can't have everything, even if you had the ultimate headphone setup.
I don't know. I have probably some of the best headphones out, the Focals, and they sound great and everything, but there's nothing like sitting in here. Maybe it's expectation bias, maybe because I see 7-foot speakers in front of me. But when you sit here and you're in the money seat and you put on a recording and it's just surreal, especially when you have a good up mixer like the Dolby up mixer and you put on 2-channel music and you get that nice ambient fill and
Yeah,
it doesn't mess up the front sound stage. It just sounds natural. There's nothing like it, man. I sometimes prefer that over just listening to multi-channel music. I've got where is it? Steven Wilson recordings here. I'm a huge fan of him.
yeah, Steve. Okay,
Um Dominique Phil's MA. When I listen to how her music is produced, it's hard for me to listen to a lot of my favorite music anymore because it just takes it to the next level. The way the recording technique and everything else, and the bass, and it's killer, man. It's killer. You can't get that with a headphone unless you get binaural, of course. But there's not a whole lot of binaural music out there that I've listened to some of the binaural music. Like I've heard Dark Side of the Moon binaural. It was gimmicky. I didn't hear much benefit at all from that.
yeah, it's. I think that most hi-fi of the future is probably going to be headphone based rather than speaker based, because more people are moving into cities, right? And the cities don't have large living spaces. You can't have like a monster stereo system in like an apartment in an urban area, right? So like since more people are moving to urban areas, and that's headphones are going to be the sound system of choice for that sort of an environment. And so I think that technology there is where you're going to see a lot of really a lot of growth and cool things happening. Like all the technology is coming out just for headphones. Like,
But also at the same time, I think there's a resurgence for people wanting to hear good quality audio in their houses because I think spatial audio, like I just could not believe how that's blown up in the last 6 months. You go on Apple, I went on Apple Music when it first came out and there was like a handful of recordings. Now everything is populated with spatial audio and there's some really good mixes. I mean, I've had David Frangione on last week. I don't know if you watched that one, but he's actually making some of the mixes for Apple Music. And go listen to the Coldplay Coloratura in Atmos. It's incredible. It's just like it's a transformative experience.
I'll have to buy an Atmos system for. I actually can't. I don't think I can install an Atmos system in my house. So
Then
if
you got to use the bouncy house speakers, James.
my
Yeah,
ceiling is
that's
not. I have like a drop ceiling. It's not going to work with a bouncy house.
then put height. Can you put height channels on the front and back walls?
I could yeah, I could do that. I could probably do that. That's one thing I can do. I just like me. I'm happy with just like a stereo pair. Mostly what I'm doing is listen just to two speakers. And like I've heard a lot of like Atmos demos and other kind of demos, with object-oriented soundtracks. It's cool, but for
Well,
me,
some of them aren't good. If you go listen to like they try to put Rush subdivisions in Atmos, and it was a disaster. I mean, Rush recordings never sounded that great to begin with. Unfortunately, some of my favorite movie music from the 70s and 80s was just not produced
recorded
well.
well.
Yeah.
The thing is, for music, it's a nice recording helps, but if the performance is really, really good, I'm fine with listening to like even if the recording isn't great, if the performance is really good, it overrides the recording. Any detriments, any flaws the recording might have, I'm fine. That's like you can still hear like the performance even if the recording isn't great. It's not. It's better to have a good recording, but like the musical artistry is like what it counts for the most for me. I'll just there's a lot of crappy recordings from like the 60s, 70s, 80s. The music though is just great. The music it's still very listenable.
Yeah.
That's just me though.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny when you think about just how recording qualities vary even over decades. Like Miles Davis Kind of Blue is still an incredibly well recorded record that was all done in the studio with all the session musicians simultaneously playing. I think it was all improv with primitive miking techniques, yet that's a better recording than most of the stuff that's out today. Or you listen to some of the older jazz recordings from the 70s, man, and on vinyl especially, it's like,
I think what helps is that they just kept it simple, right? If you keep
yeah,
things simple, you can't screw up, right? It's harder to screw up when you keep things simple. So like, you know, if you know what you're doing with just simple techniques, just be straightforward, right? Don't try to over process anything. Don't use too much gimmicks, like studio gimmicks. You can get just a really nice recording. And those recording techniques, like just really good recording techniques, have been around for a long decades, many, many decades. So yeah, there's albums that sound great from like the 50s, I think. 40s, going back to the 40s.
no, come on, that's like
No, I'm not saying the
Shirley
40s. I'm
Chaplin and
saying
stuff. Yeah,
that from the 50s on, I think you start to get some very good sounding albums. Going back to the 40s, though, they just
yeah.
the
There's not a whole lot of music from like the 50s other than like Frank Sinatra that I think I would listen to, but that's just me. But
yeah, I think
I don't
going
know.
back to the
You
40s.
sound like an old man, James, listening to 50s recordings. Come
No,
on.
I don't really listen to 50s or too much, but like I think that's when like recording starts to sound really good, like hi-fi, right? But I
Yeah,
think somehow going before that, I mean I don't know the history of the recording industry, right? Everything sounds almost tinny because it's like bandwidth limited. I guess it might be the mics they used or the recording techniques, like the whatever tape they were using, the medium they were using, but it just
yeah.
doesn't sound. Something happened in the 50s that started making recordings sound pretty good, and then it just got better from there. But nowadays it's crazy, right? Crazy good, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And by people that really are doing it for the first time, like we had Dominic Phil MA on with her record producer, and the dude just started doing this, and I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, you don't realize the level of fidelity that you put in that recording, or like the whoever's mixing the recordings for Billie Eilish. Love her or hate her production is excellent on her albums. Um, and this is just like pop music, like usually people say, "Oh, pop sounds like garbage," but there's some good pop recordings out now that just will blow your mind. Like Marion Hill or whatever that band is. That's another one that sounds really good on Apple Music if you listen to it.
Sure, yeah, pop music, a lot of people are dismissive of it, and sometimes it's warranted, but sometimes pop music can sound really good.
Dude,
Sometimes
Michael Jackson Thriller is one of the best sounding pop albums I think ever made. And that's like Quincy Jones, or I think is the one that produced it, and it's from
yeah.
1983. And whether it's on vinyl or it's on digital, that was a masterpiece of production right there.
I've never taken the time to just sit down and really listen to it, so I don't know. Maybe I
Oh,
should. Maybe I
yeah.
should. I just haven't done that yet.
Go listen to like Lady in My Life. I mean, that song just sounds really freaking good on a good system.
Yeah, I mean, Jackson, yeah, there's really good Michael Jackson. But then again, he's always had the best producers. He's always had that big money behind him, right?
Yeah.
So that his productions were the best that money could buy, right? Since he was the most popular artist in the world for a long time. Yeah,
So let me ask you this, now that you're a subjectivist and you're this kind of hippie dude,
yeah,
do
right. I
do
just
you
going with the
elevate
science, all right? I'm just going by the science, all right?
do you elevate your cables? Do you have a lava lamp in there? Do you have Hare Krishna to, have you had
The
some type of
beads, right?
revelation? Huh?
I might start. Why not, right? Hey, well, it's all a matter of belief and stuff. So I don't think that stuff actually works. Whatever I think is, it's going to have an impact on my experience. So I
So
don't know.
these mod guys, these tweaker guys, these companies that come up with the cable lifters and all this other stuff, maybe I should give them a break a little bit. Maybe their tweaks do work, but not in the way that they think they work. because they have bad science. Their science is never valid.
Yeah,
But
there's science.
maybe they should just go by the fact that it's visual, it's eye candy, and they should just change their marketing to say this is the eye candy that we're selling you, and you're going to have expectation bias, and you're going to hear the difference.
Yeah,
And you know what? I'm not going to argue with people anymore. When people go on and they bash my videos on cable measurements, I'm going to be like, you know what? I believe you heard a difference,
yeah, I think they
but I
heard the
don't believe you
difference.
heard a difference for the reason you think you heard a difference.
Yeah, these guys, I don't think on all these like, these like the changes these people they claim to make with different cable changes, feet changes, whatever. I think that they're not lying. These people, I don't know about the I think some of the manufacturers believe they make a difference. I think a lot of the people who
Yeah.
buy their stuff think, they really think that there's a difference there. I think some of the manufacturers know it's kind of like it's just bogus. They're selling the power of suggestion. But if they never made any claims like the guys who are saying, well, our the crystal globe that you put on top of your CD player has like quantum properties that enhance the harmonics of your recording, right? That's obvious bogus, and that's a very cynical, that's obvious BS, right? But I mean, I wouldn't go for that. But if you just said, well, it's we like it, we think it sounds better, we'd have no, there's no that's just our experience, and we have nothing to back that up. I could get behind that, right? Because well, that's at least they're not lying, right? There's no way to disprove that. So yeah, it's just I'd say when you consider the science, right? When you don't dismiss the psychology of listening, then I would like to think it makes you more open-minded.
Hmm.
I can't get away from the science. Like since I've already been exposed to the science of what of what sounds what's been shown to sound good on like human preference. I can't get away from that, and so like that's what I look for, and that's what sounds good to me. But then again, that's my own biases. So like I'm just saying for people who put so much stock and they're hardcore like objectivist like stances, it's not backed by science. They're not hearing anything that they're not hearing reality. They just aren't. And that's what I'm here to say with this presentation. You don't have access to that, to what's actually being reproduced. There's just too much going on in your brain that ruins it all. So I don't know. That's the gist of my presentation here.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well said. I think we wrapped it up. Man, we just kind of went off on a lot of tangents,
Yeah.
and I know everybody's been like beating my door down about finishing that Yamaha review, and I'm trying to get that bench test result done before Christmas, and I'm going to try to set up Wipeout in here and just hope I don't get disappointed that Wipeout doesn't do anything yet again. I mean, Yamaha's only had Wipeout going for 20 years, and it really hasn't done anything since, but hopefully that'll change.
Well, maybe someone just tells you, "Hey, it's so much better now," and if you believe it, that's might be what you'll hear. So,
Hey, I give Yamaha credit on one thing because Wipeout hardly does anything. It has less chance of messing things up.
I wouldn't mind it, just for a lot of room correction. What they all need is a way just to control stuff below the transition frequency, and just let your speakers do the rest.
That's all I've been saying all along, man, and we've all been saying that. Actually, Harman was the first that basically came up with that, and yet we still have correction systems that want to do everything. And I mean, there's been cases where I've had good results with Odyssey, but generally speaking, when I've lowered the correction down to 500 hertz, I had more consistent results.
Yeah, that's all I want. I don't
Yeah.
want if you have good speakers, the those EQ systems shouldn't be doing much to them at all, above the transition frequencies. Like yeah, I that's they're more likely to cause damage than they are like good because well that's another like rant for another
Which we've
live
covered. I
stream.
mean,
Yeah,
we
we've covered
yeah.
that. The problems with like auto correction systems. I think yeah we've been there. So yeah. Anyways, it's hard not to go on a rant when you talk about audio stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I think that wraps it up. James, we'll be talking, but happy holidays to everybody. If we don't do another live stream before Christmas, I probably will get on one more time. I think I have Frangione coming one more time before Christmas. But if I don't, for some reason, because I haven't even like started my Christmas shopping, that's what I got to be doing next. But good to have you here, James. Appreciate everything you've done this year. Looking forward to next year, you covering bigger and better products, and hopefully we'll have some Maximus subwoofers for you to lift up your steps. And
Yeah, better products, but let's not get them too much bigger because, man, my back. I just tested 2 tower speakers today, and oh, my legs are still sore from that. Let's do better products, not bigger ones.
you got to do the core, James. You got to work the core.
Eh,
So if you could do an exercise at home, get on a bench that's relatively low and just stand up and sit down with one leg. Put your other leg forward and stand up and sit down and do that on each leg 10 times. It's probably going to be hard on your weak leg, but if you do that consistently a few times a week, you're going to build a lot of leg strength.
Sure.
It'll help you lift those paradigm founders more easily.
Well, maybe it's worth a try if it preserves them because, when I
Yeah, you're
lifted the,
damaging the speakers that are going to be coming here from my video shoot.
I
Thanks a
guess
lot.
we have to tell the viewers, yeah, like I tested the paradigm founders, but they weigh quite a bit. They're like just a bit under 80 pounds. And when I was bringing them up a flight of stairs, I banged a corner, and now they're dented. And those were going to Gene. Sorry, Gene. They were really nice speakers.
Damn.
I can vouch for that. It's just a small little chip. It's not big. It's not bad.
Well,
So yeah.
put some paint on it so I don't see it.
Okay.
Otherwise, I won't think it sounds as good if I see that.
Oh no, I just ruined the sound too. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
well, sorry about that.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. Don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to us to suggest video topics, ask questions, whatever you want to do. Get car advice if you want, because I've been researching cars lately. Also, you get a copy of the slide presentation if you want. It's on Patreon. And if you guys are really impatient about the Yamaha measurements, I put some up there as well. But I'll be working on that review now. So hopefully I'll have it out in the next week or two. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.